Terraria is easy to learn. We're all just stupid. This is the hot take I'll be defending today, and by the end of the video, you will not only realize that I am actually right, but that just about every person who picks up Terraria for the first time is doing it wrong. And I have 3 built-in game features that will prove to you just how easy Terraria is to learn. Now, one thing I'm going to have to get out of the way right now is that I, for the longest time, would have joined the chorus of people saying Terraria is very difficult to learn and not particularly noob-friendly. Most people, it would seem, even argue that the game is a wiki game, so to speak, because you more or less are required to use the wiki if you're going to figure out what you're supposed to do. I was one of these people as well. At least, that was until I introduced my friend Travis to Terraria and realized there are so many ways that the game pokes and prods you in the right direction that people's complaints about it being hard to learn, including my own, no longer made any sense to me. With that, let's get to the first point, the first built-in feature that guides players to where they need to go, and no, it's not the guide, it's the loading screen tips. How many times you will see these things depends entirely on the person and perhaps how willing they are to continue playing the game after their first experience or 2. Some people sit down for 10-hour sessions and thus will see these just once in those 10 hours, while others don't have the luxury of being a living potato and so hop on and off for 1 or 2-hour sessions. The tips are definitely the weakest or least helpful tool Terraria uses to teach new players due to there being no apparent rhyme or reason as to when certain tips will appear and the potentially very small number of tips you'll see during your time playing the game. In order for them to be really helpful, you will have had to log on and off the game several times, and thus the game has to have held your interest for that long, and that might not be the case if you're a new player who has already grown frustrated after the first hour. Perhaps more glaring an issue than that, though, is the loading screen can be super short, and thus the tips won't be up for long enough to actually read them. Perhaps the worse your PC and the longer your loading times, the better for learning the game. But these tips are far more helpful than you might think and can be responsible for pushing new players in the right direction. And by point you in the right direction, I mean they directly tell you in-game features. Some tell you basic things like how you change your spawn point, that water breaks your fall, and even how to obtain torches. Others explain how progression works, like you need to upgrade your pickaxe to mine certain ores, that you need a furnace to craft bars out of ores, which is something people unfamiliar with survival games might not know, and even how to get certain NPCs. This text even tells you that there is some queen bee out there and that you should keep an eye out for it. There are some tips that are more flavor text than anything, like how you shouldn't kill bunnies, you can wear a bucket on your head, and that time heals all wounds. I guess that last one is technically a game feature as you do heal gradually over time, but that's probably not going to occur to most new players, and even took me a moment to think of it as anything other than the typical idiom we recite. The next time you join a new world, take a moment and look at some of the tips that appear on your screen and think of them as though you had never played the game before. So many tips are incredibly helpful and can introduce you to new game features, point you in a new direction, or reveal game features you would have never known existed. The guide is usually pretty vague in what he says, only gently nudging the player in the right direction with hints, while the tips most often spell them out. Take a look at this tip that tells you how the lucky horseshoe works. That's nice and all, but the second sentence then tells you where to find them. If a new player sees this tip, they will suddenly learn that floating islands exist in the game, which is something I'm sure takes a long time for many noobs to discover, because why would anybody waste their time exploring the sky? Who would think there's anything up there? This is how tips can gradually teach people how to play the game. They are the least reliable due to any tips showing up at any time, and they require you to be looking at the loading screen. But if a new person has their heart set on learning Terraria, the tips will become one of their best friends. The second best friend is the guide I just mentioned. Of course, he is one of the 3 mechanics Terraria uses to teach new players. He is the most obvious one after all, and is probably the primary way most people learn the game outside of using online resources or hours of trial and error. I have a whole video that goes into why the guide makes or breaks Terraria, and you can check that out if you'd like to learn more about how the guide teaches new players the game. But let's go over to the Cliff Notes version here. Unlike tips, the guide's dialogue options are dependent on certain progression markers in the game. Before the player has gathered anything, he will tell them how to chop down trees to make shelter, how a workbench works, how to craft torches, and a little information about walls. He'll push you to do mining, tell you about ores, how to craft them into bars, how to make or purchase an anvil, make mana stars, and most importantly, he'll spell out exactly how to make suitable housing, and will even spell out how to make suspicious-looking eyes. And that's just what he does when the player has made no progression at all. There are dialogue options that point the player to how they get every single one of the NPCs in the game. This dialogue not only tells them how to get more people in their world, but also tells them there are guns in the game. There are giant beasts of some sort in the jungle. Pretty explicitly, he says you should explore the desert, and that there is a friendly NPC that can be found underground. Those are the most direct ones, though many of the other dialogues could point new people into new progression markers if they read between the lines enough. It doesn't stop there either. The guide has dialogue options that are dependent on which bosses have been defeated, and so he'll teach the new player how to get certain bosses to spawn. He's more vague about it, for example saying that in the middle of the night on a snowy evening, there is some scary roar. This will take a little interpreting for people, as they have to put together that a snow only falls in the tundra, so they have to wait for it to snow while also standing around all night. But this is a method of getting deer clops to spawn. Now the guide is viewed as a more pre-hard mode NPC, but he does give quite a bit of information in hard mode as well. Not as much as pre-hard mode, of course, but he tells players about the existence of wyverns and hints at where they can be found. He suggests the player try and find a treasure map. He tells you how to make an adamantite forge and hints at how you can spawn most of the bosses. The only boss I couldn't find him hint at was the Empress of Light, strangely enough, maybe since she's the last boss that's been added to the game and they haven't gotten around to adding a hint for her, or maybe I missed it on the list. And I am including the moon events when I say that. The guide hints at how you can spawn those as well. And this is only if you ever use the guide for his advice and never figure out there's a crafting option. This will require a little more work, but new players can learn of many things by placing an item into the crafting box and looking through what can be made with different materials. Especially early in the game, there are several very basic materials that are capable of crafting hard mode and late game gear. By looking through this, they can figure out what might be out there. The flamethrower is a great example of this. It can't be acquired until after Skeletron Prime, but you can learn of its existence after checking what a simple iron or lead bar makes. I must admit, however, there is one potential problem with this, and that is that a new player could actually confuse themselves by going through all the possible items they can craft. They have no concept of a pre-hard mode and hard mode, and so they might end up seeing something like a flamethrower, want to craft it, and spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out how to get Souls of Fright and a Mithril Anvil. So there's a bit of a danger, I suppose, in confusing the new person by checking out crafting recipes. But there's still lots of craftable items that can be acquired in pre-hard mode that will help the player out big time, and they can learn of their existence and how to craft them by looking up recipes using the guide. And finally, perhaps one of the best and most unorthodox methods of learning how to play Terraria, the achievements. This is something I suspect won't even occur to most people, but these achievements are actually really good at pointing the player to their next step in progression. And since these achievements appear in the UI right next to your inventory, it's not like it's hard to find them if you're the kind of person who actually tries to learn the game and fully explores your UI. Now, these achievements often don't spell out the steps required to get them, but they are very explicit in what a player needs to do, and perhaps most importantly, in a noob-friendly order. First, chop down a tree, then get an NPC to move in. This teaches the player that 1. NPCs can move in, and 2. That they need to make shelter. They are then told how to make a hammer, and that they should go mine ore to discover and smash a heart crystal, obtain an anvil, and from what? And there's treasure underground to make mana stars and a hook. All of these are fantastic progression markers for a new player, and achieving them is simple enough while also pushing the noob to explore the world, which often leads to some of their own discoveries. There are achievements that tell the player to defeat every single boss in the game while giving some hint as to where they can be found or when they can be found. Even with the evil bosses, there is another achievement that tells them to break orbs or hearts. With Queen Bee, they're told to find hives in the jungle. There's an achievement for reaching the underworld, for making the very necessary molten pickaxe, to mine the new hard mode ores, make wings, and so much more. Honestly, if neither tips nor the guide existed, looking at the achievements alone would be enough for players to learn the game because it gives very clear indicators as to what else they can do. It's not how I would have thought to learn the game, and I guess a good number of the more intermediary progression markers are not in order, and that could cause a little confusion, but the achievements have all the basics right at the top and call by name every different boss and event and many of the most important accessories and tools that can be found. Many of them are more or less pointless, or for those people who just want to 100% the game, but it can't be denied just how helpful so many of these achievements are in guiding the new player. And so, all this begs the question, why does Terraria have the reputation of being a wiki game? Why do so many people struggle to learn it? Why have all the friends I've introduced to the game had such a hard time getting a grasp of it? There is one question that sums up what may very well be the single most difficult hurdle for every noob to clear.
Don't know what else to do right now. I'm at a loss. I'm out of ideas.
But I just outlined 3 different ways that Terraria goes out of its way to teach the new player. If you play the game on console and maybe mobile as well, yes, I know there's a tutorial, but the PC player base is the largest one, and thus is how most people will first experience this game. And I see comment after comment of people expressing how hard it is to learn and get into Terraria. People don't take advantage of these built-in systems as they're right there. Or perhaps more accurately, why do they never notice them?
Say, there's a person to let you tell you how to survive in this land. Oh, wait, that's me. Oh, hello, on day 3.
Well, I've been bringing my friend Travis through the game recently and have been using his experience to dive deep into Terraria's game design, and have very intentionally taken a very hands-off approach to introducing him to the game and glean as much as I can. From observing him, I can confidently say that the tips are not something every person is going to see. It took about 5 sessions before he even noticed the tips were appearing on the loading screen, and since then, I'm unsure he's ever bothered to read them again, despite one of the ones he actually did read having some useful information for him. Then there's the guide. It took him 3 in-game days to notice the guide was there, but when he did, he utilized the guide heavily and learned a lot of the game's features. However, the guide is the least direct and least consistent with pushing players to their next progression marker. That on top of the fact that he has a lot of dialogue options that aren't even necessarily shared in the proper order, and he found himself rereading the same dialogue options or reading ones he didn't have any context for. He took what he could, but it didn't take long for him to start ignoring the guide or else use him significantly less. Finally, with the achievements, he is actually the first person I've ever introduced into the game who gave any thought to these things, and he even looked through them before joining the world for the first time. Even so, they did not appear to guide his decision-making in any way. Perhaps this is because he looked at them too early and then forgot, or maybe he just didn't understand what they were talking about, even if I would consider them quite simple. The only time I noticed him utilize achievements to push progression was when he noticed the achievement for breaking shadow orbs. This pushed him to the corruption, where he quickly deduced what a shadow orb was and started breaking things until a worm spawned, giving him a mission to accomplish. The unique thing about Travis, though, is that he is an avid reader, and of all the people I've introduced into the game, he has done the single best job at utilizing the game's features to learn the game. Even so, he frequently wondered aloud, as you heard earlier, what should I do next? Why? How? All that a person needs to know is spelled out in 3 different ways. All that the player needs to do is read. You don't even need to open up a wiki, just read the dialogue the game provides you. But even my friend, who loves reading, is unwilling to read, or is perhaps just disinterested in reading the available information. Then what is Terraria supposed to do to teach new players the ropes? How else can it teach people without holding their hand and spelling everything out? If it did that, would Terraria even be a sandbox anymore? Would the game lose its charm, its magic? I think so. If it went out of its way to tell you what you should do, then what's the point? Perhaps the beauty of Terraria is that there is no right way to play it, and although the game tries to push you along the intended route, it doesn't bash you upside the head with it, trusting the player to figure it out themselves. That'd be a nice and sappy way to end the video, but I'm not satisfied with that answer. I need to know, why is Terraria hard to learn? I spelled out all the systems it provides and listed and shown examples of what it teaches you. I find no excuse for the struggle. even if I myself ignored all these offerings when I first learned the game. So this is where it comes back to you. Are you surprised Terraria has so many methods of learning the game? Did you know they existed? Or did you know and found them utterly unhelpful? Were you impatient and used the wiki rather than search the game's features? My friends have taught me a lot, but you're the only ones who can answer this question for me. Was Terraria hard for you to learn? And if so, why?